As promised, I'm here to talk about my friend Hawk this week, the man behind Hawk's Pond and many other good memories from the cabin. As I talk about Hawk, I need to go way back a lot of years because we worked in the same auto factory together, and the way I met him was he was a researcher. He liked buying things, I got to tell you that. And he always researched, and I just got into some good cameras and photography, so he heard about that, so he came and searched me out at my workstation, and that was the start of our long friendship. In 1978, Bonnie and I had purchased this goat farm in northern Minnesota, and that was our introduction to that area. And then 1980 we started going up midwinter, and that's when Hawk started coming along, and we started our winter adventures in Minnesota. That was 5 years before we came across the old log cabin out in the forest. So we had a lot of good memories of wintertime before that. We've learned a lot since those first years of going up into the cold of northern Minnesota in midwinter. This was one mistake here. We thought we had a great idea. We were able to bust right through all that snow and get right up to the cabin door. Unfortunately, the next morning, all that snow up in the engine compartment had melted, froze across the fan belt, and as soon as the engine was started up, the belt burned off. So we were sitting far from town with a vehicle that needed a belt. In those days, we usually drove through the night because we didn't want to waste any good north country time on the road. We'd pull in that old farmhouse and we'd go inside, and it might be 10 below zero to 15 below zero inside, and we'd get that little Ashley wood stove fired up, and we'd huddle around that till the heat started building up a little bit. As I said earlier, when we went up to that country in the wintertime, we went up to ski. And it was no different when we had that first farmhouse. We had a lot of wax type skis. I had some no wax, but those guys were always using the wax type to sit around at night discussing what wax was working and what wax wasn't. And there were a lot of old lanes and back through the country there. So that's where we broke in our north country skiing. We had a lot of great times around that old farmhouse. And when the chores got done, then we would started spreading the horizons out into the neighboring forest lands for some wilder country to ski in. Hawk and Jim were really into wintertime camping, and so one day I took them way out in the forest, and I dropped them off on an old trail with the agreement that I'd pick them up in 3 days later at a Pacific time back out on the road. And they got back in there, and I think the warmest it was the whole time they were there was 20 below zero, dropping to 30 to 35 below at night. But they had such a good time in the area that the next year, Hawk and I headed back out there again just to go skiing in the daytime, and we got all the way out there, and poor Hawk, he forgot his poles. So we got a knife out and we whittled some poles, but they were pretty heavy, so by the end of the day, he was dragging behind. After about 5 years of those winter times at the farmhouse, we discovered the old log cabin and were able to purchase it. I'll never forget our first night back at that old cabin. This picture, you can see that that's the natural, only the lighting was from natural lighting from little candles, so there wasn't a lot of light unless the flash of the camera went off. But we set that up, and I think we had no idea what good times we were going to have in the future, but we were sure reveling in it that night. And you can see Hawk, he's the one sitting down there in the back with the light shining on his face, and it was a good time. We had a lot of really great ski trails, old logging trails back in the forest that we could really go out and enjoy. We did a lot of that. That was the main emphasis as we went up in the winter, was get up in the morning and have some breakfast and then go out and have a really good ski out in the trails. Back in those days, the snowmobiles were out there more, so they helped kind of pack down some things that made our travels a lot easier as we went out for a lot more miles. And one thing that made it easier over the years is we learned more about equipment. Hawk was always into equipment. Like I said, he was a researcher and a buyer, and we sit here, you can see that he's dressed up in the proper clothing with his wool, and you look over at me on the right, and I think that's back in the day. I think I still had blue jeans on, and it's something that over the years I came to forbid anyone to even come to the cabin in the wintertime with blue jeans on, because of what a poor selection of clothing they were for trying to stay warm. We spent a lot of time out skiing, but also we spent a lot of time out in that cabin yard and just relishing the beauty of that site back in those woods. And as we were at the cabin, one thing that, you had a lot of darkness, and so there was a lot of time to really cook and get doing some good menus. And Hawk, one thing about him, he didn't like to skimp on the food. If we were traveling or whatever, we stopped, we'd have a big meal. And here at the cabin, we got into this little Coleman oven, and we found out how to make these little deep dish pizzas, and we each make one up, and I don't know how we ate all that. I mean, look, that's about 2 inches thick, and it's an 8-inch pan, but we did like our food at the cabin. And even though we only had that old stove, and we improvised, and we came up with some pretty good things. I remember making pineapple upside down cake with a reflector out by the campfires. And then we didn't have near we still don't have facilities, but we have a little better system for cleanup and doing dishes and things. But everybody chipped in on the chores, and we'd have to probably melt some snow water down, melt the snow, for our water, and get inside and get our dishes cleaned up, and then get our things all prepped up so we could be heading out to ski the next day. And again, I've talked about Hawk and you can compare his clothing to mine there. I'm talking about a fashion faux pas. How many different kinds of plaid do I have on there? And he's over in his nice, really nice clothing. It served really well for out on the ski trail. I see at that time we were into our canvas mucklucks for around the cabin. I think I quit using those lately. I just got some tennis shoes, but back when the cabin was a little cooler on the floor, I think they probably felt pretty good. So you can see there's been a lot of improvements for us around that cabin. Back in those days, we had beds in the cabin. This is the way the cabin was set up. They had these big bunks in the back. It was just noisy springs. When you rolled over at night, you woke everybody up. But one thing too about Hawk is he liked to sleep. He didn't get 10 hours. He was really shortchanged, and as he'd be taking a daytime nap, I kind of remember even wake up in the morning as kind of his little thing he'd say was just 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes. Hawk died unexpectedly in 1995. I think he was 47 years old. His death, it hit a lot of people hard. It hit me really hard. I know that I've never shed as many tears over anyone passing as I did my friend Hawk. I think a lot of it had to do with everything seemed fine right until it wasn't. And the shock was hard to take. It took a long time to recover from that one. Everybody misses him. This is a summertime scene out on Hawk's Pond. This was his favorite place to go in the wintertime, and he'd get out there, and it was a west-facing bank, and he could get out there in the afternoon, and he'd get up on the edge of that beaver pond. He'd lay out a pad, and he'd take a nap out there. That's what led me on the 10-year anniversary of his death. Is I was clearing off the top of the pond, and this big cedar was laying across there, and I cut up some slabs, and I made this memorial to Hawk, and it's become a very common stopping spot for me now. I go out on that bench and I mentioned Hawk liked to take a nap, and so even when I did it, I made that little pillow in the right there that you could lay down there and you could look out in the pond. Now it's hard to believe that it's been that many years since Hawk's passing, because his memories are still alive.